Hello, friends. So, Bible study, the NIV Acts, chapter 15. We're going to go 36 through chapter 16, verse 15. It covers several different parables. This first one called A Disagreement Between Paul and Barnabas. Some time later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they were doing." Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it was wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had a sharp disagreement that they parted company. So they had an argument and decided they didn't want to hang out with each other anymore. We're no longer traveling buddies. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Because remember, he was Sanhedrin, so he's used to public speaking. And of course, he knows the laws very well. So of course, he's going to be able to recite all the ways that Jesus is the prophet of the Lord, because it was literally his job to study the prophets and know all their words, because that's what the Sanhedrin do. They know the law. They're supposed to be like our Senate, presuming that anybody in our Senate or House of Congress actually knows the laws. They're writing the laws, so I hope they know the laws, but some of them I have questions. I'm not at this side or that side. I don't really like politicians. Chapter 16, this thing is called Timothy Joins Paul and Silas. He came to Derbe and then went to Lydia, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was a Jewess, so Jewish, and a believer, but whose father was Greek. Now, this is important in the Jewish culture. You are only Jewish if your mother is Jewish. If your mother is Jewish, you don't need to be converted. If your father is Jewish and your mother is something else, you still have to be converted. And I know that seems like, what? Because that's the opposite of the Christian world, right? In the Christian world, usually you're whatever form of religion your father is, because he's setting the tone of like the household, right? But in the Jewish culture, this is how this works. I'm very familiar with it because when I was married to a Jewish man, and when we were talking about having children, it was a cantor who married us. But that particular temple that he went to, his family, that we went to as a family kind of thing, when we were talking about having children, they made that very clear that, the bris would also be part of a conversion process. So it would be important. The brothers at Lydia and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he was circumcised. So he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew his father was Greek. So they weren't going to listen to him because they were, enmeshed in a very, heavily Jewish area, and that's who they were speaking to. So catering to the people around them. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem for people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in faith, and they grew daily in numbers. And that is that they don't all need to be circumcised. They just did this with Timothy. Paul did this as a grown man. That's how much faith Timothy had. So if you're a grown man, you should really be considering, do you have the faith of Timothy? Do you love the Lord enough for that? Paul's vision of a man in Macedonia. This is verse 6. Again, my technology is trying to be disobedient in the background. I have to watch because sometimes it wants to delete everything I took for voice notes. If it hears me, it'll activate. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, 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 having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. They tried, they came to the border of Mysia. I've never heard of that before. Mysia. I'm going to figure out where that is. They tried to enter Bithynia, BithYnia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to, so they were just not allowed to be in there. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. Now you're like, what does that mean? What it likely means is every time they tried to head there, something else got in the way. So they were redirected to someplace else, because he'll do that. Every time you try to do something, if he doesn't want you to go someplace, he doesn't want, like if he's decided it's not safe, any of that, it's not part of your path, he will just keep redirecting you to someplace else that he wants you to be instead, because it doesn't matter what your will is. You need to get your will in alignment with his will. That's the only way you get anything done. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. Troas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia. Now that I do know I'm pronouncing right. Standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So this clearly isn't written by Paul, but is likely written by either Timothy or Silas, because that's who's with him. Because they're speaking of Paul in the third person, but we, as if they're with Paul. Lydia's conversion in Philippia. This is what this one is called. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. Samothrace? Is that like... Thrace is a place in Greece, so I'm assuming it's somewhere nearby. And the next day on to Neapolis, so definitely in Greek. From there, we traveled to Philippia. Again, it's the W's, right? A Roman colony and the leading city in the district of Macedonia. And we stayed there for several days. On the Sabbath, we went out of the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began speaking to the women who gathered there. All right. Different place, right? Different cultures, different customs. Very much so in the Jewish custom is a whole lot of stuff about when you bathe, when you wash with water. Water is very important. They live in the middle of the desert, so water is sparse. So any place where there is water, of course, is a holy worship, which is also very true of a lot of other ancient man. You can find that in a lot of Native American cultures. Water is life. I live out here in the desert. Water is definitely life. Like the difference between my backyard out there being well tended to or not is, how much I'm more in that automatic watering system. We sat down and began to speak to women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, Atira, who was a worshiper of God. However you say that name. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. "If you consider me a believer in the Lord," she said, "come and stay at my house." And she persuaded us. It's okay. It's a good day to remember that Creator redirects us. He redirects us where He wants, when He wants, because He wants. Because the reality is, at the beginning of every day, we have no idea what's going to happen, and we are always subject to divine timing. So let's remember that sometimes we can be friends with people, but we still need to go play divide and conquer. And that we can be productive in every redirect, even if it's not really what we had originally intended.
Good morning.
So, oh, look at that. Pralines Day, according to Alexa. Okay, I paused for the rest of that because she gives me a whole big morning thing. Apparently, in 1997 on this day, the government denied Roswell too. Just so you know. It's Praline Day. And Roswell was denied. I don't buy that either. Like, right. They're experimenting on something out there. But I'm also of that thing, as much as I don't particularly like politicians. I do also believe there are some things that governments need to do to keep people safe that I don't need to know anything about because I'm not that person. That's not a good plan. So, and most of us aren't. Remember that without trust, there is no love. Okay? God redirects us to where we need to be, when we need to be, and we should focus on what it is He's given us to do in our life and not what He's given everybody else to do. And maybe go enjoy some pralines today.